hello everybody, and welcome to this exciting fireside discussion with Andrew Bloch. Now, I would like to ask you all that are listening to please do put some questions in the chat box so we can keep this as interactive as possible. But today we're going to be talking about PR, and I'm just going to briefly introduce Andrew and let him give us an introduction as well. Andrew's been in PR for nearly 25 years. He's also the official spokesman and PR for Lord Sugar. During the lockdown, he stepped down from his PR agency that he started in 2000, and he now helps brands find the right PR agencies, as well as sitting on many boards. Andrew, welcome to the Fireside Chat. How are you doing today?
I'm doing really well. Thank you for having me.
Fantastic. Andrew, look, your career sounds very, very interesting. What I'd like to know is what attracted you to PR? If you can tell us a little bit more about that and your journey.
Sure. I mean, actually, I didn't originally want to go into PR. I wanted to go into advertising. I was always quite creative, and it was something that at school my teachers had said could be an interesting sort of avenue. And cutting a very long and boring story short, getting into advertising was pretty tough. And whilst I was doing it and getting frustrated with waiting around for interviews and application processes, someone said, "Why don't you try out PR? It's similar." And I didn't really know what it was, and I ended up getting a work placement at an agency called Lynn Franks, which was a very famous PR agency in the 80s and 90s. It was the agency that Absolutely Fabulous was based on.
I remember AbFab.
And it was a crazy, crazy place. And I sort of went in to do a 3-week unpaid work placement, totally fell in love with it. And that was the start of my journey in PR. They took me on, I got a job there, and then it kind of went from there. But I've always loved the pace of it, the diversity of it. It's a really exciting industry to be a part of, and I've never got bored of it. And I do feel kind of blessed, if you can find something that you love, it doesn't feel like working. And as cliched as that sounds, it's so true.
And you've recently just stepped down from the agency you founded, Frank, in 2000. What made you step down from that?
It's a good question. I think it just felt like the right time. 20 years was, a decent slog. Running an agency is pretty relentless. There was a good team in place, good clients, agency doing really well. Round number. It just sort of, why not? I wanted to challenge myself, I guess, to go out of my comfort zone, try something different. When I was at the agency, I was always being presented by opportunities to get involved in other businesses, either in a sort of advisory capacity or taking investments in them. And because I was in full-time employment, I either wasn't allowed to do that or just didn't have the headspace to give myself to other businesses. So I thought I would set myself free from the day-to-day responsibilities of running an agency and see what happened. And that's what I've been doing for the last 6 months.
How have you seen in your years of PR, how have you seen it change? I mean, PR must have changed massively in the last 20, 25 years.
I guess it has and it hasn't. In some ways it's changed, it's almost unrecognizable, particularly technology and what technological advancement has done to the industry. So, I sound like an old fart, but, when I started, there was no email, there was no internet, there was no social media. And then that, now is such a big part of planning communication, and companies can now speak directly to their audience. You have a voice, you don't need to go through the media to reach people. But then in other ways, the principles and the techniques are exactly the same. You have to grab attention, have to get your messaging right, have to sort of balance adverse publicity with positive publicity. All the kind of actual skills are the same. It's just the methods of getting them out there have changed.
And you mentioned adverse publicity, and there is a lot of negative publicity out there, and I guess Trump's been one of them that has brought a lot of negative publicity, and some would argue negative publicity is publicity. Is negative publicity good publicity in your eyes?
I think it's probably a bit simplistic to say all publicity is good publicity. It's not. But sometimes, being talked about is better than not being talked about. And I think there is sort of a danger now, especially with social media, that brands can feel a bit frightened to put their head above the parapet, or personalities. It doesn't have to be a brand, because consumers have a direct voice to them. They can be criticized quickly. One tweet can create global attention in the wrong way. And this is why brands and personalities need PR agencies to guide them, to support them, to help them avoid crises. And when crises do happen, and when I say crisis, often that is a sort of invented controversy or outrage. It's not necessarily a genuine thing, but you can send a tweet, have one person say this is disgusting, and then you've created a news story, and the media, they kind of invent that controversy, and one person's criticism can be a headline about outrage and disgust. And so it's made PR people busy, but it's also given them the role of helping brands communicate with confidence to avoid those sort of situations.
Now, maybe some of our audience may be starting up their businesses, and they may be thinking, well, yeah, I'd love to do PR and go through a PR agency, but it can be very expensive. What do you think the best ways of getting your brand story out, or doing some sort of PR are at the beginning of a startup business?
Well, PR doesn't need to be expensive. What you need to do is, it's obviously, depending on who you are, what your business is, what you're trying to achieve, the advice is going to be different. But if you try and sort of simplify it into some basics, you need to figure out what you want to say, who you want to say it to, and how you're going to reach them. So in terms of, what you want to say, I think the biggest sort of most general piece of advice I could give is don't try and say everything. Figure out what's your place in the market and why would someone want to use your product or your service, and then get your messaging right. Nowadays, brands have a huge advantage in that they can own their own channels. So by creating a good presence online, the expense isn't necessarily there of having to take out paid for ads. They don't necessarily need a PR agency at the beginning, but you need to know how to reach that audience and how to reach them in an interesting way. There's no point building channels that have no audience and you're kind of speaking to an empty church. It's pointless. What you need to do is build that audience, and you do that by adding value, and that value could come by being humorous, by being relevant, by giving them information, by being generous, by offering them a sort of financial promotional incentive to follow you and engage with you. So there's lots of sort of ways you can find your way around getting to an audience that don't necessarily need a PR company. And of course, PR companies come in all shapes and sizes. And, just like cars, you can buy a car that gets you from A to Z pretty cheaply, but you can also buy a Ferrari that gets you there with a bit more style and elegance. So the same is true for PR.
And how do you find the right PR fit, whether that is an agency or a person? How would you gauge the fit? Because presumably that person has to understand the company and be the right fit. Otherwise, you're just spending money and not getting a return.
Yeah, that's right. Look, research is the key, and you can do that yourself. And you can, one of the things I always say to people is, look at other work that you admire, other campaigns that you think is good and relevant to what you're doing, and then find out who is behind that campaign. You want to be a bit more sophisticated. There's people like me that help facilitate introductions to the right agencies. And I've obviously got plenty of years of experience of knowing who the right people are for the right job. Or you go through an intermediary type agency, like, one of the people that I work with is the AAR. And what they do is facilitate a pitch process, and they will scan the market, go out, talk to the agencies, put together a pitch process, and appoint an agency in conjunction with a client. That's only really relevant if I guess the size of the prize is big enough. You know, you wouldn't do that for a tiny sort of PR job. If you're a big organization and you want to make a properly informed decision, you want to know who are the best people doing the best work, you would work with an expert to help you find someone. But the simplest way is look at stuff you like, people who you think are doing a good job, and find out who is behind that work. That's what I would always say. And an agency or an individual should always be judged on the quality of the work that they've done. I think, you know, we all can talk a good game and say that we're great, but actually seeing what someone has done is the best way to evaluate whether that's fair or not.
And are there measurables to actually measure the return on investment with PR?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think, you know, one of the beauties of technology and what has given PR agencies the ability to do is to demonstrate the impact of their work. And you should always be looking at the outcome of what PR has achieved, not just the output. In other words, yeah, all very well that you've got me media coverage in these newspapers, on this TV station, on this website, but has it made a difference to my business? And a good PR practitioner will look at your business holistically, look at what you're trying to achieve from a business perspective, and measure backwards from that. So sometimes, you know, say you're working for a direct to consumer brand, you can be very, very measurable in terms of you can actually directly translate the media coverage that you're generating to the sales. Sometimes you go a step back and you look at visits to a website. When you're doing campaigns on social media, you can look at the cost per acquisition of a customer. So it's more measurable than it's ever been. The days of kind of evaluating it based on, you know, we got you a piece in the Daily Mail, and if you were to take that out as an advert, that would cost this, and PR is independent and credible, so actually we're times that ad value by 3, and this is what it's worth. That's kind of dead. It's no modern PR practitioner would ever credibly measure in that way. A good PR person will always start with not just looking at your communications objectives, but what are you trying to do as a business? Are you trying to sell more? Are you trying to change people's opinions? Are you trying to lobby for a change in policy? Whatever it might be. And then they work backwards so that it can be completely measurable. And the best PR people get the most work because they're able to show the value of what they're doing, and clients spend more money. You know, a client is happy to spend money if they're getting a return on investment.
So a brand is legitimate in saying to a PR agency, well, can you show me what return on investment you could give me?
Absolutely. I mean, you should be. I think it's negligent to go into a relationship, you know, around a PR campaign if someone isn't prepared to put their money where their mouth is. Now, the difference between PR and paid media like advertising, for example, is you can't guarantee it. But to a certain degree, you know, what modern PR does is it links the editorial endorsement and what we call earned media with other forms of paid media, shared media, owned media. So you kind of put it together. And when you're creating a good plan for someone, PR is sometimes the bit that is the hardest to attribute what it's going to achieve. But a good PR person will be able to give you a really good feel of what someone can expect. And when it works well, it's the bit that massively over delivers. So if you're, I don't know, say you're creating a piece of content that is, you know, to all intents and purposes, an ad. If you're a media buying agency, you can say, if you spend this, it will get this much, this many impressions, this many people will see it. With PR,
here's the top search.
Sorry, mate.
Well, we know we're live now.
I turned all my alerts on, and then Google was listening to what I was saying and got excited. Sorry for that distraction. So yeah, with good PR, what it can do is it can take that paid spend, but by creating something interesting, something that has talkability, has that opportunity to be shared, that's where the numbers go exponential. And that's where brands can really see a huge value, because they're, you know, spending, I don't know, £1 to acquire a customer through social media advertising, through other forms of media buying. But great content, a great communications campaign can bring that cost per acquisition down to some unbelievable levels where the return on investment is much, much greater than they would ever be able to get just purely with paid for communication. Because what it all comes back to is a great idea, great messaging, something that people are going to respond to interact with. And when you get that right, that's where your whole communications mix works really, really hard and has that business impact for you.
And if you were a brand and you were about to launch, but you hadn't made any sales yet, but you had a great service, a great product, and you were thinking, well, I'll do it through social media, would you advise to get a PR agent on board?
It's hard to say without knowing what the brand was, what the category was. I think you need to find the right time to use PR, and PR should never be vanity. It's the time to use PR is if it can help you with your business objectives. I think I would always say it should be part of the mix. How significant a part of the mix will depend on who you are, what you're trying to achieve, but also what other elements are there that you're going to need to use. So if you've got a limited budget, you probably don't want to place all your bets in one area, and you also don't want to spread your bets so thin that you're not doing anything properly. I think where PR has a huge value is being able to help get that message right and help with the proposition of what you're selling. Then you need to use a mix of marketing to get that message out there. But there's no point putting money behind something that people don't want. So, when you see campaigns that drive a huge amount of traffic to a website, for example, but then there's a massive bounce rate and no one's buying anything, that is not because the performance marketing isn't working, it's because your message isn't right and you're not selling it in the right way. And so you need to kind of get all the elements right. I would never say you have to use PR, and I would never say don't bother using PR until you're this size, that size. PR can be extremely cost effective. When it's done properly and it works well, you'll get a huge return on investment. So often PR is a more accessible way of building a brand than above the line advertising, social advertising, because it can be done cheaper and achieve bigger results. But the honest truth is, if you can do it, is finding that right mix of all the best marketing messages. I don't think any particular discipline can do it on their own. They work best when there's a combination of all the different bits that you can play with.
Wow. Well, I think you've given some golden nuggets there, Andrew. But, I'm very conscious of time, and it wouldn't be an interview with you without talking about what you do for Alan Sugar. Can you tell me a little bit more about your involvement and what the challenges are of working with Lord Sugar?
God, how long have we got?
Only about 5 minutes.
Okay, so I'll give you the condensed story. I mean, I've been working with him for 20 years or so, and what I do for him is I act as his spokesperson and deal with all media inquiries, but also anything sort of commercial that he's involved with. Since he started his role on The Apprentice 15 years ago, what I've been doing is working with the Apprentice winners, and for the last 7 years, that has involved him making an investment, a joint investment in the winners' business. So it's fascinating for me because I don't know what's coming one year to the next, but every year a different winner will win. Every year there is a different business. And my role with that really is, I guess, to help them make the transition from being TV personalities to credible business people with credible businesses. So in terms of the challenges with him, I mean, probably no different from anyone else. He is demanding as any other client.
Just the same as any other client. It strikes me as he comes over a little. I mean, obviously, I don't know Alan Sugar. I'd love to get on my show one day, but just what the media portray, and having seen him in various interviews, he does come across as very opinionated, which I'm not. I think that's a fantastic thing, but it's a little bit maybe perhaps demanding.
No, he's not. I mean, he's fair. And like to a certain degree, what you see is what you get, but there's a whole other sort of side to him that you don't see on TV. And I guess TV to a certain degree is a bit of a caricature, but it's not fictional. You know, he is direct, he is opinionated, but he's extremely fair and he's demanding. He requires sort of quick responses, as he would say on The Apprentice. You know, he doesn't like bullshitters or schmoozers, and that is true for him as a person, but he isn't really any different to any other client. I think the main thing with him versus other people that I work with, I've never seen such a sort of variety and pace of different opportunities, different challenges, and he loves that, and I love that, and there's a really sort of fast pace to working with him. You know, but I've got used to his style of working. He's got used to mine. It's, you know, when you work with someone for that period of time, you know, most of our communication and messaging is 2 or 3 words, you know, and we know each other well enough to, you don't need to do the kind of, hi, how are you? What's the weather like?
Absolutely.
You know, it's just, you know, there's this opportunity. I don't think it's right. And he'll say, okay. Or say, do you want to do this? No. And that's it, you know, and there is dozens of these sort of messages on email or WhatsApp or whatever it might be every single day. And that's when you build a relationship with a client, that's when you work effectively. And it's a trust thing as well. I think, you know, he trusts me to not let anything slip and to do the best I can for him. And, you know, that's why it's worked, I think.
And did he give you a set of performance indicators, or did he say to you, right, this is what I want as in terms of a return on investment?
It's an excellent question. And no is the honest answer. I think, you know, I'd know about it if I do something wrong. He's one of these people.
Fired, I think, might.
Oh yeah, I live in fear of that. No, I think, you know, he's one of these people. You're doing well when, you know, he's not telling you you're doing something wrong. I don't expect loads of praise for the stuff that I do because it's my job to do it. But when he does say a sort of well done or that's good, or it means so much more. And it's not kind of every day necessarily, because he's kind of, I think like any good manager or boss, you give people praise where it's warranted and you don't kind of do it for the sake of doing it. And also if someone does something wrong or you're not happy with something, you're very direct and you tell them too. And that's our relationship. But because of the work that I'm doing, it's so varied that it's almost lots of different clients in one. So the KPIs for each of his individual businesses are all very different, as is, I guess, the KPI for working with him personally. But I guess, you know, my indicator of whether things are going well is just the fact that things continue. And if they didn't, that would be the ultimate kind of failure of reaching a KPI. I'd feel that I wasn't doing my job properly and, you know, it wasn't worth working together.
And Andrew, I mean, he works with a number of really diverse clients across all different industry sectors. And I know we've spoken, and you also deal with a variety of different clients across different sectors. I'm quite interested in now in some of the work that you're doing. We talked about your new consultancy and talking to other PR agencies and helping the fit with brands, but you also sit on various different boards. Can you tell me about some of those boards?
Yes, so I sit on a few different boards. One is a PR software company called Propel, and what they do is build media lists for PR companies to help speak to people, but then have a whole kind of CRM process to manage the flow of communication between agencies and the media, and then a way of evaluating, actually quite interestingly, what they can do on their software, going back to what we were talking about earlier, is they can look at, if you generated a piece of media coverage, whether that media coverage is directly linked back to a hit to a website, and it all links in with Google Analytics. So really, really good for PR people to be able to demonstrate, I spoke to this journalist, we appeared in this publication or on this website, blah, blah, blah. and then that led to this many hits to your website, and actually that led to this many sales. Brilliant. So I work with them and I advise them on all aspects of their business, of how they can grow, how they can position themselves in the market, how they can go up against their competitors, create a value proposition, how they can sell, working on the business development. Another business I'm involved in is called Phoenix 51, which was actually founded by one of the apprentice winners from 2007, Lee McQueen, and it is an online recruitment and assessment platform, which has really found its moment, because recruiting and assessing talent at the moment is harder than it's ever been. But you know, we make a lot of unconscious decisions when we hire, when we assess, and it helps sort that out.
Andrew, just before we finish, and we're coming to the end, we've just been asked a question. So a question from the audience is, tell us about the Pink Nails campaign.
Pink Nails campaign? No, I had pink nails for the month of October. So it was for a charity called Future Dreams, which is a breast cancer awareness charity. And they asked me to help them during Breast Cancer Awareness Month and find a voice and what they could do. For years, they'd been doing this campaign called Let's Nail Breast Cancer, where women would go into salons, have their nails done, make a donation to the charity. I said to them, you know, why don't you sort of turn it on its head? Let's get men to do it. Much more unusual. If a guy has pink nails, they're going to get asked why they've got pink nails, and they're going to be forced to talk about the charity. And so they loved the idea. So we kind of pivoted to men, and I got a load of different celebrities on board, and they did as well, to paint their nails pink. And then we needed a kind of a launch moment to grab awareness. So one of the people I do a lot of work with is Ronnie O'Sullivan, the snooker player, and he was playing in the English Open Championships, and we got chatting, and I said, would you paint your nails pink and play a tournament with your nails pink? And he was like, yeah, okay. So he did, and it just grabbed global headlines, because especially I knew that, you know, with snooker, there's so many close-ups of someone's hands. There was no way that the media couldn't report on why he had pink nails. So all of the commentators and all of the broadcasters that were covering it had to talk about it. All of the media that had shots of him playing in the tournament had to talk about it. And it was just amazing. I mean, it got so much publicity, but my KPI for that was not just awareness, it was donations. So we linked it to a very, very simple text donate campaign, and it raised loads of money as well. So
Andrew, it sounds like you really nailed that one.
Very good. Very good.
Listen, I'm so sorry. We've actually come to the end of our chat, and it's gone so fast. I wanted to ask you so many questions. Andrew, it's been a real pleasure having you here. I'm looking forward to finding out more about you and watching this space. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It was a real pleasure.